there, thanks for dropping by. Bit of kitchen time. Most people know this was coming anyway. I got caught up with a care collab for the Dendrobium loddigesii, or loddigesii, however you want to say it. There's probably a correct way, and am I bothered? Probably not. But that was followed up by me thinking about what I ought to do with it, because it was just sort of sat there on hold and not being thought about. But that sort of focused my attention on it. It's a dendrobium that does have really stunning blooms. They're not long lived, but you know, they're sort of worthwhile. First thing was, this moss is old and stale and needs to come off. Well, then I sort of thought about, well, if I'm going to do this, I ought to do it onto live moss and do it properly. So we then had the trip out to get the live moss. And now what we've got to do is get this lot off and decide what's alive and what's not, because some of these kikis didn't make it. But they're taking up space, if you see what I mean, when they're not going to be productive. So first thing is to get everything off and see what we're working with. So I want to pull this fishing line off gently. There are some delicate new growths in places, and fishing line can just slice those off, you know, no trouble. I just want to sort of get this fishing line off gently. Not sure where that piece goes. Looks like it goes. That was probably put round under the plants to hold the moss in place before I started. That's why that was on so tight. Right, so what we've got to do now is sort of tease away. Dubious as to whether that piece is alive. This piece obviously is. And it does actually have one new growth on it. I don't have to get every single piece of this moss off, but it would be better if I could get as much as possible off. The one thing that will do is expose the root tips, some of which may start to grow. Because of the way this grows, it's one of those that's easy to get new roots to grow from. Alright, so we've got a green area there, a couple of little shoots there, and the cane that they came off of. So that's a good piece. Alright, that's a dead piece, as is that. However, this is not only a live piece but has a new growth on it, so this one's important. I might end up with just 2 or 3 pieces. And depending on what I end up with will depend on what I do with them, if you see what I mean. Do I put them back on this mount, or will this mount just be too big? I mean, if they're going to grow, then they'll need room to expand because of the way they grow. So that's another live piece. Let's get this piece off. And this piece has some reasonable roots on it. And it has new growths just starting, so I will strap that down, but nonetheless it's a live piece. Oh, hang on, the cat's got no food. That'll be wrong. Don't you shout at me. Didn't know he was out, I thought he was upstairs. Right, so what have we got here? So that's a piece where it has a leaf on it, but I'm not actually sure it's alive. But we'll give it a chance, as we haven't got many. And then this is a good piece here. got a good piece here, in as much as it's a cane that's split, and there's a new growth with new roots already starting, so that's a good piece. What have we got left now? Is this a single piece or lots of little pieces? I think this is a single piece, so this again will be another good piece. This is a cane with lots of kikis already growing, or have already grown. I won't say growing, but they are last year's kikis on a small section of cane, so that's a good piece. That should shoot out in several places. Right, so let's get this moss off. If I'm going to reuse this mount, then obviously I'll sterilise it, which for me is I just pour boiling water over it. If there's an excess of old roots stuck, I might give it a scrub with a toothbrush just to get them off, but most of the time they just pick off. The bark is sound, it's a good piece, it's quite flat but rough. Yeah, it's actually the back of a piece that just doesn't work very well because of that deep crevice. So you know, that's a better bet. Don't be frightened of using the back of bark, it works fine. Right, so what have we got then? What we've got is one piece there, a larger cane which already has some new growths, another piece that's not bad. No, changed my mind. Another little piece that's growing upwards with a nice strong new growth, and a piece with several growths from last year. So that's what we've got, and that will easily fit on that mount. So I think I will reuse the mount and we'll spread those along. This is the one that needs care because it's already starting its new growths with its delicate little new roots, so that needs to go flat on the moss, and the roots at this end will help support that cane. And if I lie that cane down on the moss and strap it down against the moss, it may shoot out some more, we shall see. So lengthways and a couple pointing the other way, because I'm going to grow this flat. I'm not going to hang it up, I'm going to grow it flat. It will take up more shelf space, but so be it. I want to try and grow this in a more natural form. So I think they can go sort of like that. Just make sure that long one is okay. Right, I'll have a quick tidy up and then go and get my moss, some fishing line, and we'll give it a go. Okay, now this is going to be fun because under normal circumstances you've got to hold the plants, hold the moss, wrap the fishing line round, and it all gets quite complicated, and it can be very frustrating because as you try and tie, pieces fall off, you know, the moss falls off, the plants fall off. Now I'm going to do this the way I think this plant will like it more. Under normal circumstances, when I mount nowadays, I put the plant on the mount and the moss on top. That way, if I ever want to get the plant off, the moss just comes off the top. If I want to change the moss just comes off the top. But I think the way this grows, it wants moss underneath the roots as well as on top. Now, having just made this tray really pretty and filled it up with live moss, I'm now going to strip it off. Now this is quite thin moss in as much as it hasn't got much of a base underneath it, but it is full of sticks and pine needles, many of which I'm going to try and get out now as I'm going to use it, and then we'll see how flat that goes down. And what I'm going to do is tease it. I'm going to stretch it so that it actually occupies more space. So it's not quite so tightly packed, if you see what I mean. And then when I've got the the mount actually covered, we'll look at seeing where the plants are going to go. And then what I'll do is I'll probably tie the plants on. Oh, I don't, but I probably won't need to actually, because I'm doing this flat, so nothing's going to fall off, is it? Not really. I just need another little piece for there, don't I? Oops, huge log. Right, so that's a nice even covering of moss. Yeah. And don't forget, if the moss grabs hold of this mount, it will grow, so it will extend to the edges. The moss on a mount in my conditions and the way that I treat my mounts doesn't grow incredibly well like it might do if it was, you know, sort of still in the wild, on the grounds that in between waterings it does dry out, which in its normal position in the wild it probably wouldn't dry out as much or as often. But nonetheless it seems to put up with it. Now this is our piece with the two new growths. Now it has to go that way to put the new growths at the base touching the moss, and the roots that way up. And because those two little growths are probably going to grow, they can go quite close to the edge of the moss. So that's going to go like that. That piece is going to go like that. Right, so we've got another long piece here. See, these do have a way up. They do have a best way. And that new growth is pointing that way. So it's going to have to go over that way, even though that doesn't look as good. But this one, we might be able to sit that one up in the air so that it actually sticks up from the mount like that. That will help with it looking nice. So I'm quite happy for some of the kikis to be aerial. That's its natural way. So I'm just putting those roots under there to hold that one still. Right, now we've got little pieces now. So that one's got roots there and there, so that can go anywhere, quite honestly. That can go there like that. It's a bit artistic, this, isn't it? This one can go pointing in the opposite direction into that space there. And then that leaves me with one little tiny piece growing upwards with a new growth already on it, and you can go in that gap there. So that gives me quite a coverage. That's not bad. So what I think I'll do now is I'll just arrange some moss very carefully over the top of some of the roots, and then we'll tie it on. I don't need to tie this on first. It's not all going to fall off like it can do sometimes, but this isn't going to. So I just need some, not much, just some to go over the really exposed roots, you know, the heavy showing roots. And there aren't too many of those, luckily. The fact that they're touching this moss, I think they're going to grow into it reasonably successfully. So that's all I'm going to do. Right, dry hands, don't mess with fishing line, and wet hands. It doesn't work. The stuff just sticks to you and won't let go. Right, so this is my old fishing line. Still keeps going. I'm going to take off a lot because I don't want to run out halfway round, and I think I'm going to have to go round quite a few times because I'm not only holding those little plants on carefully, but I'm also holding the moss on. And some of that moss went on in quite big pieces, the idea being that it won't need quite so much tying on. It's not like lots of little pieces, so it should be okay. Right. Start with a slip knot. Don't usually film in the mornings, but I needed this out of the way. I had trouble with my editing software. I've been sitting on a Windows update that's like a new version of Windows. It's been sat there since October and I've been refusing to install it because the last time I installed a new version it caused me lots of problems, and I thought, well, the amount of changes that are in there, I don't need them. You know, everything's working okay. There's, you know, there are some bug fixes in there, but I haven't noticed those bugs, so I don't need it, if you see what I mean. So I've been holding it off. Well, I took the bull by the horns and installed it, and it has caused some problems. But looking at the fixes they've done since October, I don't think I've had anywhere near as many problems as the pioneers would have had, who install everything as soon as they get it, which I don't do. But basically my editing software just kept shutting down, you know, so I'd get part way through doing something, sometimes as little as adding another clip to the timeline, and whoomp, it would just shut down. And in the end I had to reinstall it, which when you're on a laptop that hasn't got a CD drive and your version is on CDs, it's not very easy. But I remember from when the laptop crashed and I had to get a replacement, had to go back to the manufacturer, and in fact they actually fixed it, but I managed to copy the CDs literally into my hard drive backup, and it was just a matter of finding where the hell I'd put them in amongst all those backups, but I did find them, which meant I could reinstall without the CDs. The only reason I needed the CDs was for the installation code to actually allow it to run. So I managed to get all that done, and it's been working fine ever since. Then I started having troubles with my photo editing software. Now, it was working fine, but it was taking a ridiculous amount of time to just load. You know, to just come up with the initial screen where you sort of decide what you want to do next. And it was taking an age. And so basically I uninstalled that and reinstalled it. It's a free piece of software. It was just a matter of finding a download and replace that. And now I've only got to touch it and it loads. So obviously there's some compatibility issues, you know, where older versions of software that haven't been installed under that new version of Windows, in other words they've just been left there, just don't work properly, whereas a reinstallation just sort of fixes them. So that's what I've had to do, and now I've got a man out in the streets with the it's up in the air, the drain covers, and a ladder up the telegraph pole, which means he's messing about with telephone lines and stuff. So hopefully my internet stays up. I've left myself such a tiny little end to tie here. Really haven't got much left, but I've just about got enough. If I had dry hands it would work better. The trouble is the mount's wet where I sterilised it. Come on, get in there. I might put that one round again. Doesn't seem that tight. Ugh. Right, that will do. Let me turn it over and see what the overall effect is now. Hopefully it looks reasonable. Yeah, so this is held nicely in the middle and either end, yeah, so that's one piece there. This piece over here is held in the middle and across the end. This tiny little piece here is held there. It's only held in one place, but we shall see. Now that has broken off. That is a bit of a nuisance, but I think I might be able to just tuck that under a piece of like that. That's sat on the moss. Quite know how that happened, but these things happen. And then this one is attached over the full length. the two new growths are there on the moss, touching the moss, and this one here is also new growths here with little roots strapped on. So I think we're okay. I think that will be okay. Now hopefully with the new moss, and not old stale moss that's probably quite acidic, this live moss would be acidic, but certainly in the interim this is only going to get pure water for a while until the new growths start to push on, which is pure water, you know, with a reasonably high pH. So these will get flushed frequently and it will stop the moss being acidic. A lot of the moss that is acidic, apart from the sphagnum, which just is, but some of the other moss, the forest moss and stuff like that, the acidity is only based on what's attached to the moss underneath. So if it's growing on a, you know, on the ground in a sort of conifer forest, everything that falls on the floor in the conifer forest is acidic. So the moss automatically is acidic because it's attached to some of that, you know, leaf litter or needle litter, whatever you want to call it. But it can be rinsed out. So there we go. Now we'll see what that does. As I said, I'm going to keep that flat from now on and try and get it to grow upwards. And then hopefully if we get some longer canes, we might be able to sort of, you know, when the kikis form, actually strap it back on and sort of get a nice clump, which would be nice. We will see. Anyway, thanks for dropping by and see you next time.